Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Assembly of Osteopathic Graduate Medical Education, or AOGME webinar series. We are pleased to have you join us today for this webinar on developing rural and community-based surgery residency programs. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the AOGME webpage within 7 calendar days. All webinar participants are in listen-only mode. If you experience technical issues during the webinar, please use the chat feature and one of the AOGME staff members will assist you. If you have any questions during the webinar, we would appreciate your using them using our Q&A feature at any time. If time permits, at the end of the webinar, we will have an opportunity to respond to any of your questions. I'm also excited to announce that osteopathic physicians can earn up to 1 hour of AOA Category 1A CME credit for the webinar. To obtain this credit, you must complete the webinar evaluation survey, and you also must email aogme@acom.org, and you will be sent a CME attestation form. We're going to move along and do some brief introductions of our presenters here today. I'll get started. I'm Lori Brodefeld. I'm the Director of GME Development. I work with the Wisconsin Collaborative for Rural GME, as well as the HRSA-funded Rural Residency Planning and Development Technical Assistance Center. Rural surgery is something that's really important to me. I know that we have a huge need for rural surgeons, not only in the state of Wisconsin, but across the country. And I'm thrilled to be with some really excellent surgeons today, sharing some recent findings, some trends, and some approaches to GME. So I'm going to hand it over to Mustafa.
Hi all, my name is Mustafa Abid. I'm a general surgery resident, PGY 5 at, excuse me. My alarm system is going off. I'm a general surgery resident, PGY 5 at UNC Hospital in North Carolina. I also work with the RPD tag team through my postdoc at the Shep Center for Health Services Research. I grew up rurally. My family still seeks care at rural hospitals, and so I care very much about how surgical care is administered in these settings.
I can go next. My name is Ben German. I'm a general surgeon and a DIO up at Gunderson Medical Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Kind of a long track record of being involved with graduate medical education and preparing people to go out in rural environments. I was born in a semi-urban hospital, but grew up rurally, and have a real appreciation for the subject matter and what we're all involved in. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. Dr. O'Rourke.
My name is Ann O'Rourke, and I am the program director at the University of Wisconsin General Surgery Residency, where I have 2 tracks. Sorry about that. I have an academic track, and then we have a dedicated rural track in general surgery. Although I'm at a quaternary referral center now, I also have rural roots. I'm from rural Tennessee. And my family is now scattered over the rural South. And so I also deeply care about the kind of care that my family is getting. And frankly, part of the Wisconsin idea is that the university is here to serve the state and that the borders of the university are the borders of the state. And it was very important to me that we were actually training people to serve our population. And so I'm really glad to have an opportunity to talk about our program and help other ones get started.
Great. I'm going to share my screen with all of you so we can get started with our webinar content today. So we're going to be talking about ways that we can understand the current surgery landscape and leverage opportunities. This is a webinar supported by the RPD Technical Assistance Center, and as such, we have disclosures that we need to share with all of you. So while our funding is provided by HRSA and HHS under our cooperative agreement listed on the screen, the contents of the presenters today do not necessarily represent the views nor an endorsement by HRSA, HHS, or the federal government. And then Dr. Abid is partially supported by the National Research Service Award, pre-doctoral and postdoctoral traineeship, which is very exciting. But again, want to disclose that to all of you. We are also required to disclose our conflict of interest as part of the UNE CME process, and we do not have any relevant financial relationships to disclose with ineligible companies whose primary business is producing, marketing, selling, reselling, or distributing healthcare products used on or with patients. We just generally care about rural surgeons and growing training. So our objectives today are really to help you all understand the current rural general surgery workforce. We have some really great data showing not only the training sites, but also the significant need that we have in rural communities. We also want to take some time and talk about the benefits of having a dedicated rural surgery program within your GME infrastructure, provide an overview of rural general surgery, the rural general surgery landscape, and then also give you some examples of a couple of rural programs that have recently been established. We'll also talk about resources for getting started and then available funding to help support program development or expansion.
Great. Many of y'all are probably aware of the discussion over the past several decades about access to surgical care in rural communities. Some updated statistics to think about are the fact that a third of rural counties currently are lacking a general surgeon. And there's been an 82% increase in patients living over an hour away from surgical care over the past 20 years. At the same time, there's been a 30% decline in per capita rural general surgeon workforce. This is tailed in with rural hospital closures and an aging surgeon workforce with a high retirement rate to further complicate access to surgical care. We also know that the longer you have to wait for especially access-sensitive surgical conditions, the higher the risk that you might need emergent interventions with worse outcomes. Despite 20 to 25% of the population in the US being rural, only 10 to 12% of physicians practice rurally. And finally, as many of us have noticed, there's been a continuing trend in US residency programs for graduates to pursue fellowship after training, often with an urban practice preference. And almost 90% of graduates over the past several cohorts have pursued fellowship training. So why is it beneficial then to train rurally? There's evidence outside of general surgery literature that training rurally may influence graduate medical education. Participants do practice rurally after training, especially in family medicine literature. Further, rural and community surgeons require a breadth of practice that may not be reflected at training at larger academic centers, including increased exposure to endoscopy, management of obstetric and gynecologic elective and emergent care, as well as management of elective and emergent urologic care. Some of these needs go beyond the case log requirements through the ACGME, and it would be difficult to attain exposure in a tertiary quaternary care facility with fellows and other competing learners as compared to those who are able to train in a community practice setting. And the goal would be for training to reflect the breadth of care that one's expected to provide when they leave training and preparing folks to be the best surgeon they can be for those communities. Speaking a bit more to retention, there has been some evidence in the family medicine literature that training rurally is associated with a 5 to 6-fold increase in folks choosing to practice rurally after finishing training. There is some limited evidence in the surgery literature starting to emerge that rural surgery rotations are associated with improved odds of someone choosing to practice rurally after graduation. However, this is often limited to single center studies. We look forward to hopefully having more data in the future to support this. However, findings across multiple other specialties have made it pretty clear that exposure to and training in rural settings really improves the chances that someone will decide to practice in similar settings upon graduation. The current training landscape in general surgery, however, reflects less of a focus on rural surgical training. Looking at programs that have any components of greater than 1% of training time spent rurally, with rural defined either as a non-metropolitan area or through the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy, about 10 to 13% of programs have some component of rural training. However, when you look at programs that do greater than half of their training rurally, it's less than 2% of programs, regardless of the definition of rural you use. If you look at the map on the next slide, we demonstrate kind of the geographic layout of those programs across the US. Just to orient you to the map, yellow means a rural area using the FORP definition, which is a binary definition of is this area county rural or not. Green triangles are training sites that have any amount of rural training incorporated into them, while red triangles are training sites with no rural training incorporated or reported to the ACGME. As you can see, even amongst the green triangles, there's a fair amount of geographic clustering in certain regions and large expanses with no general surgery rural training exposure in those geographies between the red triangles, which are the urban training exposure. This is just to highlight that even as more programs over the past few decades have started focusing on increasing exposure to rural training, whether it's through a track or even doing greater than 50% rural training, that exposure is still very geographically clustered and leaving large portions of the rural US excluded from this opportunity. So what are our leverage points for intervention then? We know we have the shortage of rural general surgeons. We believe strongly, based on the evidence, this is affecting patient care and outcomes. There's a number of things to think about as causes and potential leverage points. Go ahead and push through them. Yeah. One is, increased post-GME fellowship training. Folks going straight into fellowship after finishing general surgery residency are less likely to practice rurally because that's not what those jobs are asking for. It also decreases the chances that those graduates will be trained to practice in a community or rural setting with the breadth of practice we discussed earlier. There's also the urban practice preference, which may be something that can be affected by exposing trainees to rural practice during their traineeship. Those who are not exposed seem to have less likelihood of practicing rurally afterwards. There's also a decreased exposure to the breadth of general surgery. Community and rural-based programs expose their trainees to the full breadth of what a general surgeon can practice, as opposed to when we train in quaternary care centers, where sometimes, although you're training in great depth, you may not be exposed to some of the work in obstetrics, urology, or an upper and lower endoscopy that you would get in a community or rural-based setting. And finally, there's limited rural general surgery training opportunities, which limits, even if there are folks interested in pursuing this pathway, their ability to do so. And part of the reason that there may be limited training opportunities is funding limitations on creating new rural GME positions. And we'll get into this a bit further in the presentation, but some of these limitations have really affected the ability to expand in areas that could otherwise host rural training. Our hope is that by addressing some of these funding limitations, we can start creating a new pipeline of trained rural general surgeons who are ready to practice in rural communities.
Thanks for the introduction, Dr. Robert. That's great. So I was tasked with speaking to this kind of overall momentous change that's come with recognition of the need for rural surgery and development of programs. I'm going to review some program types and then also some curriculum that we think is important around the development of a rural surgeon. So certainly over the past 10 years and even up to maybe 20 years, there's been a profound recognition of this need. And so a lot of that's been related to the studies that were reviewed. I would say there's been just a momentum shift in the focus on rural surgery. And that comes with some successes and some chronic frustrations, but there certainly is a lot of fanfare for what we're trying to do. And I'm encouraged by that over my kind of years of involvement with this, with the initiative. So the first on the list is the American College of Surgeons. So just I kind of wanted to come up with some examples of that momentum shift. And the American College of Surgeons has what's called a Rural Surgery Advisory Group. It started as sort of a closet meeting with people that just got together once a year and had dinner. And it really grew very quickly. And so that advisory group has really done volumes for keeping rural surgery on the radar of the American College of Surgeons in general and starting initiatives. They have an online community format, and they've clearly advocated nationally for rural surgery. There's a variety of national organizations, but one that's important to this group would be the Association of Program Directors in Surgery. So program directors that are heavily engaged in education and program initiatives. They have a biannual meeting. They have a rural surgery task force, and they have a history of hosting panels and paper sessions related to rural surgery program development and application. So it's been a real powerful organization on that front. The next is the AOGME Surgery RC, which has established a rural track designation where residents can be trained with specifications separate from standard surgery programs. This is a new programming available over the past couple of years. To my knowledge, I know there's one program that's up and running. There may be others in the application process. but does provide a unique program design. And then lastly, just there's been a variety of national presentations and publications, program expansions, kind of just focus on this work. And so all that's been very prevalent in the literature. You can advance the slide. So there's a variety of program types that are out there. And there's just several different avenues to accomplish this work. And it really, historically, the first and probably most effective has simply been a general surgery program with a lack of competing learners in surgical subspecialties. A program that has exposure to a variety of general surgeons who practice broadly, and frankly, a track record of graduating surgeons who practice rurally. So these aren't rurally designated programs, they're just programs that have an interest and a focus on training people to be in these environments. Those characteristics are true of many residency programs with an associated track record to support it. So not all medical students know, where they want to ultimately practice, but having this type of program exposure is really critical to train those that may want the skills to develop their interest, but also to expose others who are not really clear on their intention at the earliest in medical school where they ultimately want to be. So we need to have programs with options of going different tracks. The second one are what have been called rural surgery tracks in the past. Dr. O'Rourke's going to review her program in more detail later, but these have become really popular, especially in the upper Midwest over the past several years. Some are just starting to graduate their first residents, others are well down the road. And they're typically a separate categorical position filled through in a university setting and have exposure to rural surgery within their same state. The key for the program seems to be, again, this exposure to surgeons who are practicing broadly. So if residents see surgeons doing this work, then they are inspired by it and they want to take those steps to achieve the same type practice. Another common program type, you could advance the slide, is just including rural surgery experiences within your program. So you have a standard general surgery program, but you provide a surgery elective, something that could last a month or several months. But it basically gives exposure to residents during a smaller set of time to see if that is a setting that they want to practice in. And so, we know that if residents, have grown up, rurally, and have it and desire that they have a higher percentage chance of practicing rurally. And so, for other people who've never lived in a rural environment, just by having an exposure, it can be pretty short. It really just may light their fire to then proceed with that interest. The next one is the more formal or newly more formal ACGME Rural Track Program. These are ACGME accredited programs in which some or all of your residents in a program can gain urban and rural experience. But more than half of the education and training for the residents chosen to be on these tracks has to be in a rural area. And so again, it's fairly new development within the ACGME. The programs can be brand new or they can be expansions of an existing program. And I think we're going to have a little bit of some tools that we'll distribute, but the ACGME has terrific tools to make these programs happen and a toolkit with kind of step-by-step process to investigate that as an option. I just say, regardless of program type, with regards to the curriculum, the curricular components for rural surgery should include really a strong background in each of the essential content areas of general surgery. Those essential content areas are like, hernia, biliary, abdomen, surgical critical care, breast. So across the board, just the expected things of a general surgeon. And so those are important. Additionally, upper and lower endoscopy are absolutely critical. These procedures constitute usually more than 50% of a rural surgeon's practice. So they really need to come out of their surgery training fluent in endoscopy. And one of the tougher things is therapeutic endoscopy, which is super important. Residents will enter rural practices and be on call their first night for the GI bleeds and things like that. And so having them either be entering practice where they can be mentored a bit, are making sure they gain that experience before they leave is super important. As far as subspecialty training, it's really subspecialty training in general should be standard for all residents, but really specifically for those entering rural surgery, and really should be tailored to their anticipated experience. This gets back to Dr. Abed's slide about ACGME requirements not always being consistent with what a rural surgeon may need in development. So things like OBGYN, gynecology, orthopedics, urology, plastic surgery, vascular surgery elements, or otolaryngology. Any of our residents have gone into practice settings where they've had various types of those practices. And so assessing where they're going and then providing that experience is critical. I mentioned briefly just a rural surgery experience in general. So I think that's really important for trainees during their time, so they really see what it's like on the ground running and what the expectations are. Practice management principles. So practice management principles are important for any resident, but I think specifically for those going into a rural surgery experience where they are oftentimes managing their own practice, and they are very often serving in leadership roles within their institutions and community. And so guiding them as far as leaders and making sure they have some business sense along the way is really important. So I think I'll transition now to Laura. I think you're going to talk about funding next.
We have Anne next.
Yeah, I'm just going to squeeze in with a couple of things. Just introducing a couple of different ideas. So the Marshall University Consortium program is actually the first separately accredited rural track program, meaning that they meet the criteria of having over 50% of their training in an actual designated rural location. And so they started their first cohort last year and have a primary training site that is in a population of 30,000. And then they have multiple multi-site relationships to ensure that they're getting the exposure that they need, the case numbers that they need, which is often, I think, a real barrier to having greater time in very rural locations. And then they've really benefited from technical assistance through rural GME and then funding opportunities. And they're doing great. And then I can just talk a little bit about the idea of just having a separate training track. And so Dr. Jarman really set me up because he just said like all the things that we sort of needed for a specific rural training track. Our state is still facing a shortage of surgeons, especially in our rural areas. And anybody who knows or has any association with the University of Wisconsin knows that we have something called the Wisconsin Idea, and that is that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. And I just felt we weren't serving our community well by only training academic surgeons. My academic track is expected 2 years of dedicated research time in between their PGY 2 and 3 year. And almost all of them go on to fellowships and end up practicing in academic settings. And so they weren't really serving the population that needed to be served. And so we established a rural track separate from our academic track. And these residents go through in the standard 5 years. And we benefited greatly from grant funding to help us with this, because anytime the residents are not working at the University of Wisconsin, their salary is not being paid for, and they need housing and transportation and all the things while they're away. And so that is how we managed to swing financially to have this rural track. And our residents spend time in a large community practice in northern Wisconsin, where they are working with amazing rural surgeons, general surgeons. And then part of their time they spend in a critical access hospital. And they go to those same hospitals and have those same mentors every year of their PGY 2, 3, and 4 year. They get the experience that they need, particularly their additional endoscopy experience while they're away. And then we have some additional kind of rotations that they do here in Madison. So they spend time on L&D. When the OB residents are in conference, the general surgery rural residents are the ones covering L&D. and doing the C-section, so that we try to have been very creative with trying to get them the experience that they will need. My program is fairly new. I only have 4 graduates, 3 of whom are practicing in rural Wisconsin. 1 is practicing in rural Maine, and I've just expanded my complement to 2 residents now. And this allows me a little, hopefully I can keep 1 in the state of Wisconsin, and then hopefully we can, if they stay in the Midwest, great, but there's plenty of places in this country who need surgeons in rural communities. And this has been a real, the amazing thing about this is one of the downstream effects. I truly don't think you need to spend 50% of your time in a rural location. You need to have role models as a surgeon. If you practice only in a quaternary referral center and you only see the neck with someone who does thyroid surgery every single day, they're an endocrine surgeon, you don't think it doesn't occur to you that you could be somebody who could work in that area as well. You have to have role models who are actual general surgeons and are confident and have the courage to be a generalist. And if you only see people working in a subspecialty practice in a quaternary referral center, you can't envision yourself as that person who is doing everything. And so that mentorship and that time that they spend with people, and I will tell you, some of the surgeons at their bigger referral center do have subspecialty fellowship training, but they all still take general surgery call. And so all of those surgeons are the role models that allow our residents to envision themselves working in a practice like that. And then the time that they're in their smaller hospital, their critical access hospital, their case volume is not as high, but they get practice management, they get the community leadership, and they get to see what it's like to see every single one of your patients at the grocery store. And so those 2 pieces of things I think are super important for us. And then here is, I kind of talked about this without my slide, but our residents, they are participate in all of our conferences, and so all their didactics and things like that doesn't have to be handled at their site. It is really just a time for them to work very closely with mentors. And I will just say that our residents that are in this track, because they have such close mentored relationships with these surgeons without any competing learners or anything else, always have the highest case volume, always are the most confident when they finish. And unlike, I think, a lot of residents who feel like they have to do fellowship because they aren't feeling confident enough to go out into practice, the residents in this track, because of the mentored relationship they've had and sort of some accelerated autonomy, feel confident going out into practice. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about this, and I'll hand it back over to Lori, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne, and just appreciate being able to, hear about your experience and also the program at Marshall. We want to talk about some of the funding that is available to support launching new surgery programs. If you aren't familiar with the Rural Residency Planning and Development Grant, HRSA does fund up to $750,000 to support startup costs. And for surgery programs, this is huge. It can allow you to hire a program director, hire faculty, and really start to build infrastructure for, either a rural track program or even a rurally located program. I think, in our research, we've identified several hospitals that could host a surgery residency program, but don't have a program yet. And with RPD, we have funded to date 84 grantees across 38 states, 1 territory, offering a total of $64 million in startup funding. And to date, we've funded 2 surgery programs, and we have 1 program that you heard about earlier, which is the Marshall program in Logan, West Virginia. In addition to, that startup funding, there is funding available through Medicare, through a rural track program increase. And there's 2 different mechanisms to kind of accomplish this rural track designation. And I think GME finance is complicated, and on our Rural GME website, I will show you shortly in our resource section that we have a webinar on Rural GME finance. And if you're not familiar with that, I would really encourage you to watch the webinar that was done earlier this year on what's new in Rural GME finance, because it really does highlight, how you can make this work. But essentially, an urban hospital can get an FTE cap increase if 51% or more of the training time occurs in a CMS rural county. And in this case, it could be a new program, or a program could pursue a complement increase. So if you have an existing program, it's in a CMS defined urban area, and then you identify a rural place where 51% of the training can occur, you could get a cap increase for the complement increase, and it wouldn't have as much restriction as far as needing to hire a new program director, et cetera. There's I think a lot of opportunity with the Section 127 complement increase example. And like we said, Marshall University did receive ACGME accreditation actually as the very first rural track program in the country, regardless of any specialty. So again, really proud of that team at Marshall to launch that program. And I've had the opportunity to visit Logan, West Virginia, and it is just a beautiful place and some really amazing residents that they've recruited into the program. So in addition to the startup funding provided by RRPD, there's also state funding, and we're seeing increasing state interest in supporting surgery program development. Just in a quick looking of different grant opportunities, Indiana, Florida, and Wisconsin all do support rural surgery program development. And I want to just highlight that in Wisconsin, in addition to Ann's program, we also have a rurally located program in Marshfield. And then we also have the Medical College of Wisconsin that has created a rural surgery track, very similar to Ann's, where the residents are rotating in rural communities. I think it's about 12 months out of the year. So again, that's done through state expansion funding and through planning and development grants. And then in addition to that, a lot of the state funding can be accomplished through Medicaid GME, and we're seeing continued increases in Medicaid GME and even state supporting surgery expansions, just knowing that we have a shortage of rural surgeons, we have a shortage of general surgeons, and need to continue to grow that workforce. So in addition to that, I want to highlight that there is a notice of funding that's being forecasted with HRSA that should hopefully be posted next month around November 19th. And again, that funding is up to $750,000, and the deadline date for RRPD will be February 19th. So you would need to create that account on grants.gov, get a grant writer or someone from your team who's savvy with grants to hopefully apply and consider this funding opportunity for rural surgery. Like I said, we've only had 2 of our 84 programs to date that have applied for surgery, and we would love to see more surgery applicants, knowing that there's a significant need. Also want to talk a little bit about technical assistance. Technical assistance can really help support the launch of a rural surgery program. And you don't have to be an RRPD grantee to take advantage of some of these resources. On Rural GME, you can create an account if you haven't already. All you need is an email and a password, and I'll show that to you in just a little bit, some of those tools and resources. But in the Rural GME portal, we have accreditation information and resources, as well as information on faculty and program director development. And then we have just all kinds of resources on governance and navigating partnerships. And again, many states are starting to offer technical assistance to support new programs. Examples include Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Missouri. And in each of those cases, they are supporting rural surgery development with technical assistance. And resources, I want to talk about a Rural GME website. After you log in with your email and your password, you'll be taken to a portal where you can learn more by getting started. We have a roadmap to program development. I'll show that to you in a little bit. There's also some timelines. So if you are thinking about launching a program, you can kind of see step by step what are those resources to get a program started. And then in our toolbox, we have resources for all of the RRPD specialties. So if you're interested in surgery or you're interested in other specialties, you can take a look. And then the other 2 boxes below are unique to me because I'm involved with the Technical Assistance Center. Real quick, I'm going to share the roadmap for program development, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this because I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers later. But again, when you're really kind of thinking about starting any kind of rural program or rural surgery program, you really want to, focus your efforts on stage 1, which are, really kind of identifying, if this is a potential program, what are the assets within the local community? What's the support for this program? Do you have a sponsoring institution, or would you need to create your own sponsoring institution? What kind of leadership support is there? What kind of surgeon support is there as you get this program off the ground? And then once you have all of those foundational pieces ready, that's when you can move into program design, starting to look at, do you have a program director? Do you have faculty support? Are the surgeons, again, really on board with this plan? Are they willing to teach? And then looking at your budget. And again, if you don't have a sponsoring institution, working on that sponsoring institution application, identifying your DIO, establishing a GMEC. So again, you can go into the toolbox, look at this roadmap if you are considering launching a program and if you haven't seen this resource already. I want to highlight a few resources that are within our toolbox, and these are things that I think are relevant to any of you here today. The one that probably I think is most important is the What's New with Rural GME Financing, because it does cover more in depth some of those financial considerations if you are considering a rural track program and looking at just kind of what are the latest rules from CMS. There is also a really great tool. It's called the Hospital Type and Lookup File, so you can look up all of the hospitals across the country. You can see what's their DGME or IME cap. Are they rural? Are they not rural? And then what's their status with Section 131? So again, just a lot of really great tools and resources in the Rural GME portal. So take a look at that if you haven't already. Then I want to also just take a moment and highlight our hospital analyzer. The hospital analyzer tool allows you to look up every single hospital in every state, rural and urban, throughout the country. I think we have like 99% of hospitals. There are some hospitals that for some reason haven't filed a cost report. And if they have not filed a cost report, we don't have their information. But for all other hospitals, we do. When you log into the hospital analyzer, and this is available right within our portal, you just click on the hospital analyzer button. And when you select by state, you can actually look up every single hospital in the state, and you can select city, you can select multiple cities. And then when you click on a particular city, you will get a report on that hospital. This is what it looks like. This is just one example from Alaska. You can see, if this hospital is metropolitan or not metropolitan, if it's considered rural by CMS, if it's in a CBSA or not. These all have impacts to funding. So again, that's, I think, important to, kind of take a look at this. If you select the click for more detail at the end of nearly every one of those implications, you can go to a glossary. We have a comprehensive glossary that talks about the funding implications with each type of hospital. I do want to also note that this hospital analyzer tool will be updated in November. So all of the data in there, it's about 11 months old. So there have been some changes. So please note that you'll want to take a look just before the notice of funding drops for RRPD. We will have an updated hospital analyzer file for you to take a look at. But this is really important as you're kind of considering rural hospitals, first determining, are they CMS rural, are they not? And then also just looking at what the funding implications are. For example, if they're a Medicare dependent hospital or sole community hospital, there's different funding implications associated with those hospital types. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Abid.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Kind of to summarize a couple key points, though, we discussed a number of different opportunities to support the expansion of training of surgeons who can practice in community and rural settings. We talked about how that takes a lot of different shapes, including through formalized tracks, through programs that have Medicare funding. And we discussed that some of these pathways have had low uptake with only one program through the rural residency track that's been accredited. We're currently looking to understand kind of what is the breadth in the hospital landscape of places that could host a program. That both means from a funding perspective, that also means from procedural volume and type of procedures, the patients that take care of. And you all, as experts of the local systems that you work in, also understand what hospitals or hospital systems might be appropriate for rotations or to host residents as part of a track program or an integrated spot to encourage rural training. So that's a really valuable piece of this that the community can contribute in identifying potential host sites. Ongoing outreach efforts from RPD TAC and ruralgme.org. We talked through kind of the toolkit here in terms of reaching out and helping to connect potential host sites, both with financial resources to help start programs, but also with the technical assistance that is really important to getting a program from conceptualization off the ground into practice with graduating residents. And then, as we talked about with both Dr. Jarman and Dr. O'Rourke, defining the scope of what an eligible training site means is also really important. And again, that comes down to you all who know kind of what the training sites around you and what the hospitals around you do. What kind of procedures do they do? Do they have folks there who'd be good teachers and surgical mentors? Is there a breadth of practice that can help prepare graduates to practice either in a community setting or rurally? And I think that there's no hard definition to these things as much as understanding the scope of what you're hoping the graduates are able to do in practice and what they're hoping to be able to do, and matching that to available resources that you know of that maybe aren't being utilized yet for training. So thank you all for your attention. Hopefully some questions now that we can answer from y'all. Yeah. Oh, and if you have questions, you can also email us directly at info@ruralgme.org, especially if there's questions that maybe like you want to think about what you've heard and then reach out to us. This is a great way to get some concrete answers and start the process of maybe getting some help from the RPD program and getting a program or a track started.
We will move it along to questions, and I see several questions. Let's see, we will start out with a question from one of the participants. Historically, some rural communities have relied on general surgeons to perform C-sections. Our current rural tracks and rural training experiences in general surgery, including training to perform C-sections, and how does this contribute to solutions with OB deserts?
I mean, I can just tell you what we do with our residents. So while they are at their critical access hospital site, they actually have a very busy L&D. And so they are on C-section call, similar with the general surgeons, and can scrub with the OB-GYN that is there. If there are cases. And then we have actually partnered with our OB-GYN residency here at the main hospital. And while their residents are away at conference, our rural residents actually cover the L&D floor and do any of the C-sections that are happening at that time, to try to give them the experience and at least the confidence to know their way around an area that they're not working as frequently. So they get some experience both at one of their rural sites and here at the main hospital.
Yeah, and I would just add to that there's no doubt that like OB, besides endoscopy, if you were to consider something outside of the typical realm of general surgery, C-sections are probably number 2 with regards to need and experience. So ahead of like neurosurgery and ortho and urology, like C-sections are critical. And so again, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think I wonder if there'd be enough experience in most rural settings to get someone trained like during their training. It may be that there are definitely places like that. At Gunderson, we don't have OBGYN as a residency program. So all the surgery residents, regardless of rural interest or not, do OBGYN. And our residents, when they're done, they have about 40 C-sections, which seems well in line with what's anticipated to do that procedure. So I think I love Ann's partnership with her home institution. The OBGYNs in our institution absolutely love to have a surgery resident working with them because they're very able. They do it during their 3rd year, and then if they're interested in really dedicating part of their practice to that, then they just take C-section call while they're on throughout their 4th and 5th years. So a lot of different ways to accomplish that, but it certainly is critical.
Thank you. There was a question around RPD and if they could create a track similar to what Anne had developed, and saying that 51% is a barrier. I do want to clarify, for RPD, it would be for an ACGME accredited RTP. So it would need to be at least 51% rural training time. Programs like Ann's are typically supported like through state funding. So both the UW program and then our MCW rural program are funded with state appropriations. And I want to highlight just the amazing support that we do get from the state. They fund $150,000 per position for those expansion positions. And then the minimum requirement is that residents spend at least 2 months in a rural place. But we know that most of the residents like Ann's are doing over 12 months of rural training. So I think it's really exciting to see how our academic centers have really stepped up to be a part of this. And I don't know, Anne, if you have anything to add to that.
I think you got it. And actually, now that I would say we've been successful and we're retaining our rural residents in Wisconsin. And I think my home institution actually recognizes the benefit to training people who will ultimately become referral physicians or people who can help keep someone in the community rather than sending them here. And they are actually financially contributing to this residency track as well.
Yeah, and I agree that the 51% can be a barrier, and that's where state funding can hopefully help fill the void and help create programs. Another question, and I don't know, Ben, you may know the answer to this. Does an institution need to have a primary care residency established prior to establishing a surgery residency?
Yeah,
No requirement?
They do not. Oh.
Excellent. So that's good news. If you're looking to start GME, start with surgery.
Another question along those lines just in the chat is about the numbers requirement for defined category cases. And for Anne's version, absolutely not. The numbers are the same, correct? For this new AOGME rural tract, I couldn't find anything that says there's any difference. I think they have the same program, same defined category expectations as well. But I haven't seen it in print. I couldn't find that. So I think that's the truth, but I just haven't seen it in print.
Another question that I would love to get thoughts, especially from Anne on, is, do you have trouble keeping your rural general surgeons participating? Some of the rural hospitals that I'm planning on working with only have local surgeons that are staying for 1 to 2 years.
You mean my faculty at rural sites?
Yeah.
So I have, as I mentioned, I have 2 sites. One is in Neenah, Wisconsin, which is a larger kind of multi-specialty practice surgery group that works in a sort of I'd say a tertiary they are a referral center. They're a level 2 trauma center. They all still take general surgery call and do a lot of outreach in many smaller communities. And that is a very stable group. And so I don't have trouble. In fact, 2 of my residents, one resident from my rural tract is a faculty member there, and one resident who was not in my rural tract has been hired there. And then my original critical access hospital was a fantastic group of surgeons, and one did retire, and then it left one surgeon, and she said to me, I don't think I can manage with residents when I'm by myself and the volume I'm going to be covering. And so, but she gave us enough heads up, and actually the senior resident, he really wanted to finish his time with her. And so she kept him, even though our other residents, we have a new site. And I would actually say that here in Wisconsin, I have 3 or 4 other hospitals that some critical access, some sort of medium sized, who are very eager to have our residents come spend time with them. And so I have hospitals sort of knocking on my door saying, hey, can we participate in your rural surgery residency? Because institutions recognize that this is an opportunity to recruit their next faculty. And so I have not had trouble I did have the one bit of turnover, but I had enough heads up and lead time and enough programs who were interested that we've not had a problem with turnover in our faculty.
And with the scenario where we basically have a rural surgery elective where residents go and rotate, and we have had some turnover in our region. So I guess I can understand the heart of the question, because if you do lose someone, it's a big deal, right? If you have a rotation plan coming up and you lose a faculty, or if there's not continuity, because that can make it harder on you as a director to know what experience they're getting. So I do, you don't want this to be like locums physicians who are training a resident for a month. And so there is a challenge in that. I don't know if it's real quantifiable, but it's something you definitely have to establish good relations. If you have people from your program that are populating your faculty afar, that's pretty awesome.
Right. Then there was a program around, can programs plan on utilizing CMS funding for operations, apply for RPD grants through HRSA for startup costs? And the answer to that is that's you can absolutely apply for RRPD, and that, kind of supports the planning and development costs. And then once you actually start training residents, that's when CMS, DGME, and IME would kick in, especially if you actually have a rural track program that is eligible for funding because you're training over 51%. But you want to also make sure that you're not crossing over those funds, because you want to maximize your per resident amount, especially if you're in like a PRA setting year. And again, this is where, watching that webinar on what's new with rural GME funding can be really key, but then also, engaging, with folks who have really good experience with finance. I've seen in Wisconsin, we've had some really great consultants that have been able to get, those PRAs maximized. And again, CMS is probably going to give you the regional average, but you want to still set yourself up for getting that highest amount possible for reimbursement when you start a program. But again, RRPD can absolutely help with those startup costs. And, I've seen estimates of $1 million to launch a program, up to 1.5 million, or even $2 million, depending on the scope of the program. So that's where RRPD can absolutely help address, those initial funding concerns when you have faculty or program directors and they're not necessarily as busy seeing patients because they're working on that accreditation application. So RRPD can be really helpful just from the funding perspective, and then also from the technical assistance perspective, having folks like Anne and Ben who can help you, in that development journey. They're a couple of our key content experts supporting programs. And then another question that came in that I would be interested in getting feedback from, either Ben or Anne, is what accreditation or regulatory challenges, do you see in building programs or in, smaller size programs? Or what challenges would you anticipate they would have?
I mean, I think you have to look very closely at the case requirements. And there are some things that a lot of places have to send their residents. And so their burn and transplant experience, I think, are some of the more challenging. And in fact, Dr. German's residents come and do their burn and transplant rotations at the University of Wisconsin with us, and we love having them. And so there have to be some partnerships with institutions that can get the experience that you maybe don't have. And there's lots of examples of that. There are plenty of places that maybe don't feel like they have the trauma experience they need. And so their residents will travel to other places to be in big urban trauma centers. And so there are bigger institutions who have experience with residents that it's just a rotation every year. They're built into their schedule. And so I would say that it seems frightening maybe, or daunting when you look at the case requirement list and the exposure and you think, well, I don't have that piece of things, but know that that is a very common in general surgery, that some programs who don't have certain types of experiences send their residents for away rotations as a routine.
And we're far away from it, but entrustable professional activities are coming down the pike, and we're hopeful that someday when we are able to, measure residents' competency by, periodic assessments, that we won't have to have the same volume requirements. And so that's definitely future, but right now we have to pay attention to the volume numbers for certain.
Another really good question, and I would love thoughts from Ben and Ann on this, especially. We're a rural hospital that used to have a general surgery residency that was AOA accredited. Our surgeons would like to be a rural rotation site for residents. What's the best way to find a general surgery program that would like to have rural rotation? So, like, how do you sell this, to a place like UW? Ann, like, what's what advice would you have for Dana?
I mean, maybe, I don't know, Ben, maybe just the Association for Program Directors in Surgery. I've had a couple of places in programs in Chicago call me and say, hey, can I send one of my residents who's interested in rural surgery to one of your rural sites? And amazingly, my DIO was actually willing to make that happen. And so I think if PDs knew that that was an option and they had residents who were interested in that, you could find, a place that would, maybe it might not be, the same time every year, or even someone every year if it's an elective, but I know that there are people who are looking for experiences for their residents. Funding will be a challenge there too, because someone will have to pay their salary while they're away.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think if if I were just, it would depend on what state you're in. I would start with the programs in your state that are currently there and accredited and just contact them. I would call them and say, hey, we're interested in participating in some rural surgery network. How can we make that happen? I think if the other challenge that comes with being out of state is that is a license and requirement and things like that. So there's a little bit more of that piece. It's not usually that expensive, but staying in state does, I think, does help on that front. So those are two things I would think about.
Great. What are your thoughts on critical access hospitals participating in a general surgery residency program? And I know you are involved in that and already are using a critical access hospital site, but what's your perspective on that?
I actually think it's critical that they have some exposure in a critical access hospital. And it is, again, I think the role modeling and the seeing yourself in that practice environment is very important. You can't envision having a career in an institution like that, or have the courage to work in a setting that is not as well resourced maybe as where you trained, unless you've had the opportunity to work in that setting. And so the critical access hospital, I don't rely on, again, for the massive case volume, and I rely on instead for people to see what the practice is like and to have mentors in that, and that will be mentors to them even if wherever they go practice. And to just also know what it's like to be a leader in that community. So our residents at their critical access hospital do quality improvement there. They go to the parades. I make them wear the giant broccoli costume that is sponsored at the hospital in Baldwin, because that's part of the stuff that hospital does. And so I think it's very important for the role modeling piece of things, and they can get their volume or breadth of cases elsewhere. There's a real critical piece of their education that comes from that, and it's not all about being in the OR all the time.
And then probably one more question. Again, we have lots of them. What do you think is, kind of, the key to success in launching a community-based or rural training program? And I think I would ask all of you that, just what do you think is, the most important kind of key to success in embarking in this endeavor?
I'd say, I just from my standpoint, it'd be partnerships, right? And perseverance. Like just, staying true to your mission if that's what you want to do. I mean, there's going to be a way to do it, but it may take several partnerships. It may take some trial and error. Perseverance wins the day on this stuff because people are really interested in it.
I mean, I would just mirror that, especially looking at some of the programs that have come through and looking at some preliminary data on smaller hospitals that could potentially host rotations in some national data sets. Partnership is the most important part. A lot of times, all of the key components are there, and there's just pieces that need to be supplemented through rotations or time in other institutions. And building those partnerships can make something that seems like impossible from like a numbers quantitative perspective to very feasible and create like an amazing training experience for trainees. And that just requires, the ability to send folks across multiple different sites. And as Dr. O'Rourke mentioned, that's extremely normal, including the program I'm at. And I think that leveraging that will let a lot more folks participate in this kind of training.
Yeah, I think I would echo what's already been said, and don't underestimate, or your allies are maybe in places you don't even realize. So some of my strongest allies are in the Department of Family Medicine, and they recognize how important it is to have this surgical infrastructure for the population that we serve. And so it might not always be your champions, may not always be surgeons, or don't look outside of the surgical community for this, because there's a real recognition, not just in surgery, that other people other than surgeons recognize that we need surgeons. So
Well, perfect way to wrap it up. And, thank you to all of you for being a part of the webinar today. And thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the webinar will be posted on the AOGME webpage within 7 days, and we will also be emailing the recording to attendees within 7 days. If you have questions, you can contact aogme@acom.org. So this concludes our webinar. Have a great rest of the day, and thank you to everybody who joined us. Take care.